Welcome, 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 everybody. We are so glad you are here to join us tonight. Thank you so much. Want to give a quick shout out to Kurt, Lisa, and John for being my co-hosts tonight. But then also we've had a pretty robust crew helping us out as well. So thanks, a major shout out to all those co-hosts. But then to bring us into tonight, I think everybody knows Wisconsin is a critical state, but it's also home. And it's home to Kurt, John, Lisa, and I. And I'm not going to cry yet. Promise. And while the four of us have been drawn to the four corners of the country, we've proudly kept one foot here. And over the last few years, we've been incredibly fortunate to get to know Angela and the team over at BLOC. And it was instantaneously that we realized we had met a kindred spirit, and both her and then the work of her team. And they're the type of people who, very similar to all of you, have a creative, out-of-the-box thinking. They have a type A drive. And to be honest, they carry a no bullshit attitude, which we all can relate to. And so we couldn't be more excited tonight to connect you to the like-minded people and ones who are really passionate to build not only the change that we need for this so critical election, but truly systemic change. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt to give a little bit of more color as to why BLOC.
Yeah, as Abby said, Wisconsin is not only critical, but is our home state. And I've had the fortunate experience to work with BLOC as they canvass their community on a regular basis. I remember going out with a handful of organizers. Rick was one of them, Rick Banks, who also ran for state assembly that year. And I remember having real conversations with real neighbors about issues big and small. It was everything from the boards on a front porch that were falling through and the family who lived there couldn't get out safely, to broader, more systemic issues, right, around lead and laterals, and connecting community members to community organizations, to elected officials, to city departments. Real work for people in the neighborhood on a daily basis. And that's what we're so passionate about BLOC, is because it's the everyday difference that the organization makes in Milwaukee, but also connects that to action on election day as well. And so we're so proud to be co-hosting this event with Lisa and John. With that, I'll pass it over to Lisa.
Yeah, well, Abby, I love what you said about calling Milwaukee home, because even though John, I live in New York and John lives in Los Angeles, when we say we're going home, we both know that we mean we're going back to Milwaukee. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Lisa Caesar. And in 2018, my brother and I started a project in Milwaukee called No Studios. No Studios serves two missions. One is to support creatives, and the other is a vehicle for social justice. And we view those missions as integrated and equally important. So I wanted to just take my time to comment a bit on this moment and why I think this moment is so critically important, and why I think that Milwaukee and Wisconsin are so critically important in this moment. So as I kind of reflect on where we are at this point, we're in the midst of a generational global health crisis. We're also in the midst of what I view as a national reckoning in connection with systemic racism that is centuries old and long overdue. And then finally, recently it's become apparent that there's a third pandemic where we're in the midst of a climate crisis. I was speaking with some folks on the West Coast this morning that can't see the sky. And so, to me, this upcoming election will determine how we resolve these three issues. Any one of these issues is enormous and can impact us for generations. But we really have to resolve all three of these issues, and they're integrated. As we know from the pandemic, racial inequity is integrated with the pandemic. I mean, and climate change. We can't separate these issues. So this election is pivotal, and Milwaukee is and Wisconsin are at the center of this election. So if you're viewing this and you're part of the Milwaukee and Wisconsin diaspora, as I am, and John and Kurt and Abby, now is the time to come home, and with your investment, or come home and help. If you're not a part of the Wisconsin, Milwaukee diaspora, and you're just a human being who cares about the planet and who is concerned about the people living on the planet, now is the time to invest in Milwaukee. And we think that BLOC is the right vehicle for that investment, especially as we approach the election, and but even afterward. The election is not going to be a panacea, and these problems are intractable. So with that, I just want to say that I'm thrilled to be here and be a part of this. Thank you, Kurt and Abby and Angela, for reaching out to John and I to invite us to participate. And I'm excited to learn more with all of you about BLOC, and I think we have a great program coming up.
I agree, Lisa. We have a star-studded cast today of folks that are joining us, and I have the great pleasure of introducing one of those amazing stars. To some of you who are not from Wisconsin, he may be new to you. If you're from Wisconsin, you know him well. He's joining us via video tonight because he's also at several other events. He's in high demand these days. I want to introduce a proud product of Milwaukee, a vocal proponent of social justice his entire life, started as a community organizer, became an elected official, and is now our lieutenant governor for the state of Wisconsin. I'd like to introduce you to the 45th and first Black lieutenant governor of the state of Wisconsin, Mr. Mandela Barnes.
Hey everybody, I'm Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, and I'm so excited to be a part of this event tonight. To join you all in supporting BLOC and their team of amazing leaders, activists, change makers, and organizers who are all devoting their entire lives to building political power in Milwaukee's Black communities and fighting for progress in our state and all across our country. Now, we know that voters in Milwaukee hold the power to keep Wisconsin blue in this election. Not win Wisconsin, keep Wisconsin blue. And if we win Wisconsin, we take back the White House. As a matter of fact, we don't win the White House if we don't take back Wisconsin. And that's how we begin the process of building a better, a more just, fair, and equitable nation. But if we want people to join us in this fight, our commitment to addressing environmental harms, breaking down barriers for Black communities, and expanding our democracy, this has to be built into everything that we do. We have to engage voters of color, and this can't just be an afterthought or merely an attempt to pander to strategic voting blocks. And candidates for office can no longer expect Black and brown communities to vote for us merely because we just happen to be better than the other side. Now, if we learned anything from 2016, is that we can't rely solely on an anti-Trump message in order to win the Electoral College and the presidency. So to bring back decency and common sense to the White House, we must inspire people. We have to invest in a vision of a more equitable, a more just and fair future. We know that BLOC has been working for years now to authentically engage the community, starting with honestly listening to what people in the community need. This is done without asking for their vote or their support for a cause. And they also understand that November 3rd is not a finish line. It's a mile marker, a critical one, but a mile marker. We have to continue organizing because we're facing multiple crises in our state, all of which disproportionately affect our communities. And the president and his administration have only fanned the flames. They've made things worse. And we saw the lengths that they'll go to hold on to their power during the April election. They took every step that they possibly could to disenfranchise people. This was done for political gain. It was unnecessary. And that's why BLOC's digital organizing program and voter turnout initiatives will be so important in this upcoming election. And unfortunately, we continue to see our state legislature fail us at every stop. Whether it's COVID-19, the climate crisis, or the systemic racism and inequity that plagues all of our systems. There's no crisis too large for the Republicans in our legislature to ignore. Those in power know that the higher the turnout among communities of color, the lower their chances of winning. So that's why we have to do everything that we can do to empower voters to make their votes and their voices heard safely and securely. We have to make sure people know how to update their registration and how to request absentee ballots in time to be counted. So COVID-19 has obviously limited our ability to knock on doors and host the rallies to get people energized. So we need groups like BLOC who already have relationships with members of these communities to be able to get this information out to folks. So I want to thank you, Angela, who I consider to be a friend. I want to thank you for your leadership. And I want to thank you, everyone who came out to support BLOC in their critical work, because they have what it takes to get creative, to be innovative, and to continue to build power in Black communities in Milwaukee and across the state. This year has been exceedingly difficult. We've had to change the ways that we live, the ways that we work and engage with one another in ways that we could have never imagined. We face tragedy after tragedy from this pandemic and so on. But we're ready to fight like hell to get rid of Donald Trump and to elect leaders that will pave the way for that just, inclusive, and equitable future that we all need, to fight the systemic injustices that existed long before the pandemic. But I'm hopeful because the door to progress is wide open in Wisconsin, as it is across our entire nation. Together, we can make a better world possible. So I want to thank you again to BLOC, all the fantastic organizers, and all of you for supporting this critical work. Thank you.
Well, if that doesn't make you optimistic, I don't know what does. And that's just the start. I'm happy to introduce our next speaker this evening, who will be joining us on the panel. Before I introduce him, though, I want to explain a little something. His title is County Executive, and he's the County Executive of Milwaukee. A county executive is kind of like a mayor of the county or a governor of the county, owns executive power in the county jurisdiction. And of course, Milwaukee is our largest county here in the state of Wisconsin. Now, David Crowley, who I'm going to introduce to you, is a proud product of public schools here in the state. He's married to a wonderful woman, Erica, and they have 2 children. And he was recently inaugurated as the first Black and youngest county executive in Milwaukee history. I want to read you a little quote from his inauguration because it really captures the spirit that he's bringing to that office. So excuse me as I look to the left here. But David said on Inauguration Day, he said, "By the time I leave office, we will give voice to those who can't speak for themselves. We will remove barriers and lift the burdens of those seeking a life of dignity. And Milwaukee County will no longer be on the list of one of the most segregated counties in America." With that, I introduce to you County Executive David Crowley.
Thank you so much, Kurt, for that introduction. Good evening, everyone. I'm David Crowley, the Milwaukee County Executive, and I'm extremely happy to join you tonight. First off, I want to thank all the organizers of tonight's event, Abby, Kurt, Lisa, and John. I'm not only grateful for your friendship, but also for your strong commitment to our community. We all have a role to play in the challenging work of advancing racial equity, improving life for working people, and defending our democracy. Thank you for the role that you all play and for bringing together our group tonight. We are well aware how high the stakes are this fall. We see day in and day out the damage that Donald Trump and the Republicans are doing to our democracy and the lives of working people. It's crystal clear how much is at stake in this election for Wisconsin and our nation, because so many families, so many, are living these realities every single day. Far too many Wisconsinites and Americans have lost their loved ones to COVID-19. Small businesses across Milwaukee and the state have closed their doors for good. Hardworking folks are out of a job with unemployment insurance running out, and our economy is struggling to bounce back. The deck has already been stacked against hardworking Wisconsinites and Americans who just want a chance to get ahead. We all deserve that opportunity and to realize that the goal we need leaders who share it. I grew up in the 53206 zip code here in Milwaukee in a family that often struggled to make ends meet. We were evicted at least 3 times during my childhood, and I know what it's like to have all of your belongings plucked from your house and literally tossed out on the curb. So bouncing back from that, it can be pretty tough. And with leaders in the White House and other positions of power that truly don't give a damn about those who are struggling, it can be next to impossible. Our Black communities in particular are facing multiple crises at this time. A COVID-19 pandemic that is causing disproportionate harm and a loss of life in Black and brown communities, and the systemic racism and racial injustice that Black Americans have experienced for over 400 years in this country. The racial disparities and inequities that persist across our economy and our culture existed way before coronavirus and before Donald Trump. But we see that this has deepened under his failed leadership. As we near November's election, the stakes could not be higher for communities of color. Our Black community has a tremendous important role to play in helping to elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to the highest office in the land. The road to the White House runs through Wisconsin. We cannot win Wisconsin without a high level of organization and engagement here in Milwaukee County. That is why it's extremely important, why BLOC and the work that they are doing is critically important. Now, I started out as an organizer, working in my neighborhood on the north side of the city of Milwaukee, and eventually started organizing for then Senator Russ Feingold. So I know that the best way that we can fight back, the best way that we can stand up for our values and work toward a brighter future, it is to organize. When BLOC first started, I was in the state assembly. It was something I was extremely excited about. And I had seen firsthand how organizing in our community came and went with each election season. To create the type of change we desire and desperately need, that sort of approach was never going to work. But BLOC is much different, much different. Day in and day out, they are working to engage and activate neighbors throughout Milwaukee. But even more importantly, in my mind, they're doing the difficult work of building long-term civic and political power in communities that for far too long have been left voiceless and ignored, or felt voiceless and ignored. They are not only talking to folks and providing them with information, but they are listening intently to what they have to say, working to understand the issues that are impacting them and the changes that they want to see. We need to do our part to make sure that BLOC is strong for this fall and for the years ahead. And that's why I've even become a monthly donor myself. So I just want to say thank you for joining us tonight and for opening your wallets to show BLOC your support and this community.
Thank you so much, County Executive Crowley. Truly appreciate that. And now I couldn't be more humbled, honestly, and to introduce a dear friend and inspiration, Miss Angela Lang, the Executive Director of BLOC. And while BLOC may be only a couple years old, standing up for what's right, organizing in her hometown, and ultimately being active and agitating her hometown has been something that Miss Lang has been up to for well over a decade. So we're thrilled to have her here tonight to walk us through the organization she founded, the incredible work her team has already accomplished, and what's ahead not only for the next 56 days, but for well beyond that.
Thank you so much. I'm truly blown away by everyone's kind words. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you all for being interested in supporting our work and really listening to what we have to say in our pitch and understanding how critical Milwaukee is. Special shout out to Kurt, Abby, Lisa, John, Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, County Executive David Crowley. I've known the Lieutenant Governor and the County Executive long before they've been in their current roles, and I just kept thinking about, wow, we've all come a long way. So with that being said, I want to go a little bit more into what BLOC is. So I do have some slides because I love pictures and I love to be able to brag on the team. So 1 second. Great. Sorry, it's been a long day. Wrong thing. Present. Here we go. Great. So I want to start with a few statistics about 53206. I always tell folks we do as much work as we can on the north side of Milwaukee and talk to as many folks that we can, but we want to show a little extra love to the zip code 53206. In 2013, UWM study found that it is the most incarcerated zip code in the state, and the majority of its Black men have spent time in jail or prison. And unfortunately, it's known as kind of ground zero for the Black community. A third of Milwaukee's vacant lots are in 53206. 2/3 of the children live in poverty. And this is a zip code that is about 95% Black. And residents receive the lowest rating for health outcomes. So again, it is ground zero for a lot of the challenges that we face as a community. So we want to show a little extra love to that community. And so with statistics like that, that means you have to do things differently. You can't just come in, a couple days or a couple weeks before an election. You need to make sure you're building authentic, genuine relationships on a year-round basis. We do something called relational organizing, which isn't new, but people love the buzzword term. But it's being able to talk to 5, 10, 15 of your folks and really working those conversations. At the end of the day, you are the best messengers to your own network. And if you aren't used to voting, you may not be on our traditional targeted list. And so this is a way for us to talk to more people and expand the electorate. We also want to expand the idea of civic engagement outside of just voting. A lot of times people think of just voting as being civically engaged, but there's so much more. And the reason we want to reframe what civic engagement is because with 53206 being one of the most incarcerated zip codes, there are folks who haven't had their voting rights restored yet. In the state of Wisconsin, your voting rights are restored when you're off paper, as they say, or off probation or parole or supervision. Then your voting rights have been restored. And a lot of times people don't even know when their voting rights are restored. But either way, we want to create a political system where people can be active and be involved. And we don't say that you're only as valuable by your ability to vote. There are folks on our staff who I'm incredibly proud of who haven't had their voting rights restored, but yet they're still out talking to the community and educating people and facilitating these really important conversations. And so that means we center those directly impacted. We are all a part of the community that we organize, which is incredibly beautiful and complex and also really heartbreaking, because at the end of the day, everything and all the issues that we advocate for, a lot of us live them very intimately, which can make this work very challenging and also that much more important. And lastly, what I always like to say is that you can't organize Black people if you don't love Black people. We have a certain unique perspective. I am proud to work with people all day, every day who look like me. So there's a certain cultural and a certain support that we have as a community and how we build together. So I wanted to give an example of why our year-round model is so important. This was an article that came out earlier this year in the New York Times, citing BLOC about how we are an example of how we train our community on a year-round basis. Typical folks call, their field team and canvassers. We call our folks ambassadors, because honestly, even though I do things like this, they are the faces of the organizations. They are the main ones doing the main work. And that is so crucial. And it's really important for us to train our folks on a year-round basis and then being able to build this sort of collective power. So we started in November of 2017. It really was a response to the 2016 election. We were devastated with the results, just like everyone else. But also on the other hand, I was incredibly frustrated, to say the least, that we were being blamed for the outcome. Black folks were being blamed solely for the outcome when turnout was down all across the state. People just wanted to point out our community. Yes, turnout was down, but we were also some of the least engaged and most disenfranchised. So it was very frustrating that we were solely carrying the blame and not the people that voted for this white supremacist. And so it was important for us to really think about, how do we do things differently? How do we make sure that what happened in 2016 doesn't happen again? And how do we really engage with folks that have typically been left out? And what does it look like for our communities to thrive? Not just sustain, but being able to truly thrive on a daily basis. Again, reimagine civic engagement. So this picture is our inaugural staff. A lot of them have moved on. Actually, every single one of them moved on to bigger and better things, whether working for the party, helping leading a faith-based organization, or running for mayor. Everyone has kind of moved on to greater things. And it's so important about what leadership development looks like with our team. So our goals are to invest in our community, engage residents to build long-term Black political power here in Milwaukee. We want to make sure that we're empowering Black leaders with the tools, trainings, and resources needed to really organize our community. So leadership development and trainings are really critical to our work. And through coordinated political action, ensure that Black issues and concerns and values are being represented at all levels of government. So how do we do this? We do this on a individual neighborhood level, one person at a time, one block at a time. We want to make sure that we have a bold, proactive agenda on what's important to our community. We're training a generation of leaders willing to confront white supremacy in a lot of different ways through elections and ongoing civic engagement. And it's also really important for us to make sure that we're standing in solidarity with other communities of color, because we know an injustice to one is an injustice to all. 2018 was our first full year where we were able to be fully operational, and we were really excited to train a new generation of folks. And our takeaways, and the reason why I cite 2018 is because it was kind of a trial run a little bit as we prepared for 2020. And our ambassadors, they said that they wanted to run for office. They were hungry for more voter education. The day after the election, they were texting us, okay, Angela, what's next? We want to hold folks accountable. We did all of this work to elect people. What's next? And so we created 5 different programs in 2019. And what we carry with us is our ambassador program. We have our civic ambassador program, which is in between election years. And then we have our electoral ambassador program, which is what we're entering into right now, where we're able to do expressed advocacy for the candidates that we support. Our silent canvas program, which was briefly mentioned before, where elected candidates, we've also opened it up to partner organizations. They are the ones being able to shadow one of our team members on doors and just listen. They're not introduced as a candidate or as an elected official. They're only there to listen, not listen to respond, but really just hear the voices of the community. Our BLOC captain program and our relational organizing program is kind of like this big telephone tree in our neighborhoods. How are we training Miss Mary that lives at the end of the block? We know that she knows everyone's business. All the kids love her. She goes, and helps everyone out. How do we train her as a leader in her own community to also train and engage the rest of the folks? And that's our BLOC captain program. And then lastly, our advocacy programs. We've been doing a lot of work around the city budget campaign. We actually worked with our coalition partners, Liberate MKE, last year to start a divestment and investment campaign to our communities. We know that in the city of Milwaukee, nearly 50% of the city budget goes to the police department, while our health department, for one example, which houses the Office of Violence Prevention, is typically funded at about 2 to 3%. And so we really wanted to fund our communities and our futures and invest less into policing. And we see the current moments that we're living in. This is giving new life to the campaigns that we started last year. So I mentioned a little bit about why our program is different. We do deep training on systems and the roles and responsibility, not just the candidate. We don't want to just show up and say, hey, vote for candidate X for sheriff. We're saying, hey, do you know what the sheriff does? Do you know their jurisdiction? Do you know how their budget works? And then being able to talk about the candidates that we support. We want to raise people's consciousness so people understand the urgency and why they're voting. We have longer Canvas launches. I've worked for organizations where I've processed paperwork, interviewed people, and trained them and sent them out within an hour. We want to make sure we're having deep and meaningful conversations. So we role play every day. We don't get people in and out in a matter of minutes. We spend at least 60 to 90 minutes with our team, constantly updating them and learning and engaging. And our folks go through roughly 30 hours of training before they even knock doors so that they're prepared to have those educational conversations. And Wellness Wednesday, we know that this is tough work, especially now. It's been a really difficult and challenging year. So we want to make sure that we're taking a midweek reset. We're acknowledging the trauma. We're supporting each other where we can. And when we were able to be in our office, unfortunately, our office is shut down now with COVID. This is what typical Wellness Wednesdays look like, being able to just bring in snacks, fruit, donuts, cupcakes, and just enjoy and center our work in joy for a second. So this is our impact in 2018. In 2018, we knocked on over 227,000 doors. And here's a breakdown of how that broke down between each candidate in each election. And we talked to over 20,000 people. And we wanted to make sure that we talked to as many people as possible. We layered in low-performing wards that were typically left behind. And in specifically the case of the state Supreme Court and Rebecca Dallett's race, it was our first field program, and we made the call in our gut that we wanted to layer in low performing wards that typically aren't talked to because they don't normally turn out. And our suspicion in our gut was right. Just by talking to folks, we were able to increase turnout by roughly 3% in those wards. So here are some images of our silent canvas program. You'll see our governor, and then you'll see 3 former presidential candidates all visit us last year, and we're able to spend some time on doors. Our fellowship program is our 10-week program. We have about 10 fellows. It's a paid opportunity. They have 3 hours of training every week, and then they have 3 hours of homework. Typically, they'd be out in the field, but we've all moved this digital, and next week is our last week. And this particular fellowship program has focused on voter suppression and digging into voter rights and being prepared for November. This is just a slide to brag on the team. I love the team, and so I always like to show the pictures. You'll see suppressed clips, you'll see our teams having fun, and you'll see even the lieutenant governor as well. It was really important for us to make sure that we were engaging connections and building relationships with elected officials as often as possible. So these were all the different opportunities that people could plug in. So stay connected with us. We would love to be able to hear your feedback and continue to build with you all and answer any questions that you all have. So this is how you all could find me, and our Twitter and Instagram, and we are on Facebook as well. So I will stop there because I try to keep this as short as possible, but I appreciate it and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much, Angela, for an amazing presentation, but more importantly, for the work that you do and showing off the team, because truly is a wonderful, wonderful team that you've built. And the programs that you've stood up have fundamentally changed how work gets done and work needs to get done. And that is not only inspiring to the direct work that you do, but it's inspiring to all of us and how we lead our lives and the way we go about our work. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you.
So next, I'm eager to introduce John Ridley, one of the No Studios co-founders and Academy Award winner. You may have heard of a couple of his films, things like 12 Years a Slave, Let It Fall Los Angeles, 1982 to 1992. And some of you may have heard about him shooting a soon-to-be filmed Showtime series in Milwaukee, which would be great to have back in our home state. John, I wanted to turn it over to you in order to hear a little bit about your motivation and focus before we dive into the conversation.
How are you all? I hope everyone is doing as best as they can in these trying circumstances. As Lisa mentioned, I'm in Los Angeles. Things are very difficult here, but they're difficult everywhere. And I really hope people are coming together despite the fact that we are all separated in various ways. We have a lot to talk about. I don't want to spend too much time talking, but I do want to really just put a finer point on something that Lisa brought up earlier. And also, even though she is my older sister, she's a very humble person. And when we talk about No Studios, and when you talk about areas in my professional career where I've been very blessed, particularly 12 Years a Slave, there was a wonderful moment where I was really acknowledged by my peers. And it's a special moment. It's a moment you dream of. But the reality is, it is just a moment. And it's one that's replicated year by year and people forget about it. And in the wake of that moment, it was really Lisa who pushed me to try to take that wonderful thing that happened and make it more real and really do something with it and do something with it in Milwaukee. As Lisa mentioned, Milwaukee is, it's the place of our birth. We grew up 4200 North 18th Street. Our parents still live in Milwaukee. Our younger sister, Beth, she still lives in Milwaukee with her family. So we wanted to do something for a city that it literally gave us every good thing in our life, our family, our values. But we also knew that our experience growing up in Milwaukee was not everyone's experience. And unless everyone has an equal opportunity, as someone said earlier, if anyone can suffer, then in some ways, all of us can suffer. So it was 2 years ago that Lisa, along with our business partners, Chris Abley and Steve Meck, decided to create No Studios. And we wanted to create a space where people could come together around the communal experience. And that was an experience that was so important to me when I was growing up, going to movie theaters, being around people, socializing with purpose. At No Studios, we want to do screenings, exhibitions, talkbacks. We have a dance fest that we do. And we also have our Art Activated, which is a social justice summit that we did last year and that we're going to do again this year. It was something that Lisa and I were very passionate about. And when we came up with the idea, there were a lot of people who said, you know what, nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody wants to talk about it. And we really believe that it wasn't about what people want to do. Sometimes it's about what people need to do. So even during this pandemic, we're going to have our Social Justice Summit in mid-October. We're certainly going to focus on virtual aspects, but we still want to celebrate our creative community in Milwaukee, but also do that around very urgent social justice issues. And the three that we're really going to excavate this year are community and policing, the role of social media in amplifying division, as well as voter suppression. And we want to do these things around responsible, solution-oriented conversations. So there may be people on one side or the other of an aisle, people who see things philosophically differently, but to really start change, it starts with getting people in the room together. And unfortunately, we're living in a space now where you even talk about trying to find common ground, trying to find areas of commonality. And people think that you're the enemy for even talking about trying to work with other individuals. But we believe that we have to do this. And we believe this because we believe that communities work best when communities work together. And ultimately, the best ways that we can work together is by engaging in participatory democracy. I mean, look, politicians, they want a lot from us. They want money, they want access, they want status. But the thing that politicians need is your vote. As Shirley Chisholm used to say, your one vote, don't give it away. But also to have that vote and choose not to use it. Some people think that's some kind of form of protest, but I do believe over the last 4 years, we've seen that not voting, not participating is not an option. And that's why we are so blessed and so honored to be part of this conversation today, to try to elevate BLOC and really try to get the message to folks that however you may feel about the democratic process, however you may feel about politicians, the one way to get people to respond is to vote. And you see that now as folks go out and try to get as much money as they can, talk about everything they can, but they are micromanaging and paying attention to those votes. They will do everything they can to take it away from us. They will do everything they can to make it difficult for us. They will do everything they can to try to delegitimize the voting process. But we all have to understand that our votes still count and still matter. And I will just say this. I was in Milwaukee on the weekend when this, frankly, this attempted murder took place in Kenosha. Our father is 86 years old. And to listen to him talk about what he had to go through to get the vote, to secure the vote, for every body, but in particular, for every person of color who has the opportunity to vote, there is no excuse. And there has been too much blood and flesh that has been spilled for us not to do everything we can to go out and vote. And we saw that in the primaries, when people stood in line for hours in the cold during a pandemic to let folks know that you cannot take away the one thing that we are guaranteed in this nation, our vote. So we have a lot to still talk about and not much time to do it. So I want to stop talking, and I really want to start engaging with these folks who are doing everything they can to ensure that all of us have the opportunity to do what is promised to us, and that is engage in participatory democracy with our one vote.
Wonderful. Told you I'd be crying later. With that, I would love to welcome back Lisa, David, and Angela into the room where we can have a more in-depth conversation and a little bit of a two-way dialogue about how do we do this and how do we cross the finish line in 56 days, but then more importantly beyond that.
Great, so fantastic. John, I always learn new stuff from you. I appreciate your comments. Angela, I wanted to just put a question to you and also give you an opportunity to kind of elaborate and illuminate some of your earlier comments. I mean, to me, one of the really refreshing and, I think maybe somewhat innovative and fantastic things that you do is you have this grounds up approach and this community focused approach to engagement. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about why you pursued this particular approach to your outreach. And then also, how do you go about recruiting your ambassadors who, because, and I know you alluded to this, but it's a lot of work. I mean, this is a big commitment. And how do you go about inspiring people to do this work? So it's sort of a two-part question, why this particular path, which I really find, empowering in a lot of ways and clearly very effective, but tedious. And then also, how do you go about getting people to do it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think specifically on the model and why we do what we do, as have you alluded to, I've been doing this work for a little while now, for coming up on 12 years, actually, which feels very strange when you're only 31. But you learn a lot in that time. I come out of student organizing. I've run, field programs. I've been able to see how other field programs have run. And so for me, I wanted to do things differently. I was able to observe a lot. And for me, what would I have needed to have been more successful? What are the big, bold things that we always talk about but never do? There are times that people call us innovative. They're like, you're so innovative. And I'm like, I don't know if we're innovative. I feel like we just do the things that should have been done years ago. Talking to people, if we actually want to expand how many people vote, that means talking to the non-voters. That also means that takes time. A lot of times that a lot of us don't have and a lot of resources we don't have. And so we have to pick and choose who we talk to and who gets that priority. And I always felt morally that that's just not a way a functioning democracy should work. And so all of these different challenges that people have identified, we try to fill those gaps and really be an example that you can do things differently. You can move to 4-day work weeks in a busy presidential cycle and the world will not fall. You can give people a break and people a rest. And I think we're really just trying to challenge what the typical culture is when it means to engage folks. We all have been a part of the community. We know what works with our people. We know what works best. And I think a lot of times there's been often a disconnect. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to take some lessons learned in the past in my organizing and kind of use that as a framework. And then being able to fill that in with the rest of the team. We gut check with our ambassadors who are out in the field often. They are the ones that are connected. So there's so many times that I'm gut checking myself based off of the feedback that we're hearing. Because again, we know what it takes and we tailor our message or we tailor the work that we do and the ways that we do it. We tailor that to what we feel is the most effective. And sometimes it's trial and error. And sometimes we know things work. And I think that that's also a very unique opportunity is that when everybody is organizing from the same community that they're a part of, that also means you have a little bit of a deeper insight to the culture and how that community will respond, which I think is what makes us a little bit different. So how do we go about recruiting people? A lot of times it's word of mouth. There are people who will get a door knock from one of our ambassadors and they say, wow, that's so great. How can I do what you're doing? Or do you all have any openings? There's a lot of times people will just walk in. So we're at this point where we don't really have to advertise a lot. There's a waiting list. It's a lot of word of mouth. It's, people are like, hey, I have this job. It is so great. I'm learning a lot. Let me bring in my team and my network. And so we're able to also kind of build this family culture and build this sense of community and camaraderie internally. And so we're fortunate enough to bring in new people. Some folks are interested in coming in through our fellowship program, as I mentioned earlier. And and then stay and then go on to be ambassadors. Or there are some folks that are, used to canvassing during election times. They're used to having that happen. And they're like, let me just get an extra quick, $15, $16 an hour because it's easy and I've done it before. And then there's been some times they walk in our office and I always open how many people have canvassed before. A lot of hands will go up and I'm like, great, this isn't that. And people realize that we put them through the training, we put them through that extra leadership development. And people, I think, really value that. And I think the work in a way kind of speaks for itself in the way that we get so many inquiries of folks that wanting to join our team.
I have a question, if I may.
Of course.
Okay. This question, I'm going to put this to you, David. And, as was mentioned earlier, unfortunately, Milwaukee leads in a lot of negative statistics for Black people. Unfortunately, in many administrations, there's been neglect, there's been underinvestment, and things like that. So for a lot of folks out there, they may feel like, well, what does it matter? It's all going to be more of the same. Why should I bother to vote? What would you say to people who may feel that way, that irrespective of who wins this election, it's just going to be more of the same?
Well, I think that's a great question, John. And I think what folks need to realize is that your vote is your voice. A lot of the times we tell people that if you didn't vote, it's hard to complain about who's in office and what decisions they are making. I mean, here in Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, Milwaukee County, we're the largest county in the state of Wisconsin. We have the largest urban community of Black and brown folks and all people of color right here within Milwaukee. But we also, like you alluded to, we lead a lot of the disparities. When you think about the education rate, graduation rate between white and Black, the gap is wider here within the city of Milwaukee and wider within the state of Wisconsin. We lock up more African-American men and Native American men as well here in the state of Wisconsin. And when we think about why you have to vote, I go back and think about my own election. I am the first African-American and the youngest person to hold the seat of county executive. And unfortunately, we had an election in the middle of a pandemic on April 7th. But we had so many people who understood what was at stake here in Milwaukee County. We wanted to make sure that we elected somebody who was from the community, grew up in this community, but also with the fact that we understand that racism is a public health crisis, we wanted to rise to the occasion. And so many people made sure to come out and let their voice be heard. And many of those folks have had that same sentiment and didn't believe that their vote didn't even matter. But I'm here to say that it does matter. When I won my seat, I won it with less than 1% of the vote. And when you think about that, so many people, because we were in the middle of a pandemic, the only way that they were able to cast their vote was by absentee ballot. But right here in the city of Milwaukee, we only had 5 polling locations open, when on average we have about 160 and 180. And we had lines around the block. It was raining, it was cold. And on top of that, we're in the middle of a pandemic. But when I think about people who say, well, my vote doesn't count, I think about my election. If less than 100 people, less than 200 people decided they weren't going to come out to vote, I don't know if I will be sitting in this seat right now. But voting is extremely important. When you think about when you think about our schools, when you think about our daycares, when you think about having access to a living wage job, when you think about the roads, when you think about racial equity, what matters is who is in that office, who is leading that office to make sure that those things are getting done. And so it's extremely important that not just coming out to vote, but knowing who you are voting for. You have to make sure that you are doing as much research as possible to know what the candidates stand for, what issues they're fighting for, and how do you see yourself as a part of them and a part of their platform. So when people say that, our votes don't matter and things of that nature, even if you don't vote, your vote was somewhat cast for those who did win the election. And we have to make sure that we're stepping up, because just because you vote does not necessarily mean that it's the end all be all of a campaign. Once you get somebody in office and it is somebody that you won, you came out to vote, it's extremely important that you hold their feet to the fire and hold them accountable in making sure that they're pushing policies and practices that not only benefit you, but your community as well. We need everybody right now to get involved. And when you think about Milwaukee alone, Trump won the state of Wisconsin with less than 23,000 votes. And here in the city of Milwaukee alone, we had 40,000 people that did not come out in 2016 that did come out in 2012. And you can just imagine what they may have looked like. And so we can't take nobody for granted anymore. We need to make sure that we're fighting for our community, fighting for resources, and fighting to make sure our voices is heard every single day, especially as people of color.
Brilliant.
Thanks, David. So Angela, I have another question for you. A question that I've gotten from John's network as we were sort of organizing this event. I know that money is important. It's always important, but other than money, are there things that folks can do either in Milwaukee or outside of Milwaukee and other parts of the country to support you? Are there other resources that you need? Are there other activations that are helpful in terms of furthering your mission? And in addition to the money, and I know, again, money is always welcome and important, but should folks be doing other things, either before the election or after?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And one I get asked very often, especially if folks don't live in Wisconsin or if they don't live in a swing state. What I always tell folks is that, yes, money is important. It takes, money to continuously to engage on a year-round basis, but also understanding these are tough economic times for some folks, and people just may not have that disposable income. And so another way to help support our work is that, are there connections that you think that we should be connected to? Are there other resources? Are there other people? We love to be able to be connected to other organizations doing similar work in other states, other individuals. We love to find ways to collaborate either locally or on a national level. We love to collaborate with our partners over at Leaders Igniting Transformation or VOCES. We want to make sure that we're collaborating as much as possible. Or do you know somebody that does want to financially contribute? Or do you know someone that does a podcast outside of their basement and you think I would be a good guest on their show? Whatever it is, we love to be connected to other folks as a way to expand our reach. Another way to expand our reach as well is making sure that we're able to have our message get out there as much as possible. And so that means amplifying our content. We want to make sure that our message is getting out as far and wide. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And we want to make sure that people understand what's happening on the ground. People want to understand the unique experience of what it means to be a Black person in the Midwest, and specifically Wisconsin, and the challenges that it has. But we also want to make sure and understand that these moments that we're living in right now, it's really important to center those directly impacted. It's really important to center the lived experiences of communities of color that are grieving and hurting and dealing with trauma in real time. I think a lot of times, and I reflect a lot about this, racialized gaslighting, where people just don't think racism is a thing anymore, as white supremacists are driving across the border and murdering protesters, right? We know that it's an issue, and I think it's really important to be able to amplify the lived experiences of the organizations, activists, organizers that are on the ground. And so being able to amplify our content also is another way to be helpful. So connections and amplifying our content. And even locally, if there's other organizations that need extra hand or two or capacity, there are folks that have emailed us that said, hey, I'm a photographer. If you need pictures taken, or if you need me to document anything, I want to be able to help in that way. So folks have gotten creative as well.
Thank you for that. That's really helpful. This is a marathon and not a sprint. So we want to be able to marshal all of the resources. So I think just, this was really helpful for me. I'm hoping that it was really helpful for folks that were able to join us. And just, in closing for me, I just wanted to make a couple of comments. John wrote an article for Deadline a week or so ago, John, that I thought was really impactful, and I'm going to paraphrase it. And the essence of it was, we're in the midst of, as I alluded to at the beginning of this program, a series of crises. And, John's sort of thought in connection with this is, what are you doing? What did we do today to impact the direction of the outcome from these crises? And in particular, the crises around the racial reckoning and the upcoming election. And I think, you know, that just really inspired me to think about, you know, the pandemic will eventually come and go. The election will be over. You know, this moment is going to end. And it really got me thinking about, you know, challenging myself and my own resources and no studios to think about, what did we do? You know, how do we want to be, how will we be remembered in this moment? And I think that's just a question that we all have to ask ourselves. You know, some moments are more important than others. This happens to be a really important one. And I just, you know, challenge myself and my staff to rise to the occasion and do everything that we could to impact the direction of the outcome. And I think that that's sort of my takeaway, and that's what I want to do between now and the election.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and thank you, every one of you, for taking time to not only be here tonight for the hour, but for all the planning and organizing that went into getting everyone together here. A special thanks to No Studios, Lisa and John, Will, who's behind the camera and making it all work. You know, you are an amazing addition to a re-addition to our state and community. We're so glad to have you home. David and Angela, thank you for doing what you do every day. I enjoy sharing text messages and virtual happy hours when we can't be with you. But keep up the great fight. We are building and expanding the network of people who care about our community, and just always call on us. We're here to help at every stage. And with that, I want to close tonight's event. And I want, if you can, and if you would, close your eyes and take yourself back to November 8th of 2016. And think about what was going through your head at that time. What was the world going to look like, right? What were the consequences of the election that we experienced together? The reality is, in Wisconsin, it was 12 votes per ward that made the decision on who became our next president. And we've seen what's happened ever since. And we have people here who have all made a choice to get involved. John and Lisa started No Studios, and they're changing the conversation in our community. Abby and I moved back to Wisconsin and got involved in politics. Many of you on the broadcast did something. And Angela started BLOC. And her and a team of people have been changing the conversation in our community. So I guess the question is, what will you do now? The choice is up to us to determine what the future looks like. And I don't think David could have been more eloquent in talking about not only voting, but holding people accountable. And voting is this first step in that journey. So on behalf of Abby and myself and everyone on this call tonight, we'd ask you to vote, get involved in any way that you can, and donate. And we particularly care for you to donate to BLOC. We think that BLOC is the best place for you to invest your time, resources, financial and otherwise, in the future of our state, in the future of our community, and the future of our country, frankly. So with that, we thank you so much for joining us tonight on a Thursday night. And we're looking forward to staying in touch with all of you over email and social. And please share this event. It's on Facebook, it's on the No Studios website, and it's on YouTube. Share with anyone who couldn't join us. And have a great evening.